Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Naruto's Secret Power of Twin Star and Had Harem with Benio A. So do 4 blue hearts. Comment, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video, and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Naruto X Rias and Akino uncensored spicy version, link in description. Eyes clenched tightly shut, Naruto shook his head violently, his golden blonde locks being tossed about as he did so, as the words echoed in his mind. When he stopped, Naruto opened his eyes, revealing cerulean blue eyes that were dulled by the memory. It wasn't until he heard the sound of footsteps rapidly approaching on the wooden floor was Naruto able to shake the remnants of the dream. The shogi door to his room was slid open, letting in the morning light and revealing a girl standing in the entryway. She had long white and black hair, with the light streaming into the room. Naruto could also make out a blue tint to the girl's hair, with 2 wavy black horizontal lines on one side of her head. She wore a pristine white furred kimono with a snowflake pattern along the hem and the bottom of the long sleeves, and a long white scarf wrapped around her neck. The girl had a bright and cheery smile with ringed amber-colored eyes that shined just as brightly. Good morn. The girl started off happily, only to falter and her smile to diminish once she noticed the state that Naruto was in. With clammy skin and a tired look in his eyes, it was clear that Naruto was not in fact having a good morning. Master Naruto. The girl spoke softly, her voice tinged with concern as she approached the blonde boy and knelt by his side. Was it another nightmare? The young woman stated rather than asked. A memory. Naruto corrected with a shake of his head, though when he saw the look of concern on the girl's face he smiled as best he could to reassure her. Don't worry Yuki Onna, I'm fine. While she didn't quite believe him, Yuki Onna did her best to return his smile. All right, if you say so, she said slowly, staring into his eyes searchingly, though it was clear that she still wasn't sure. Yuki Onna nodded her head anyway as she rose back up. I'll leave to let you get ready then, Yuki Onna told him before turning to leave, only to come to a sudden stop when she reached the doorway. Turning around, a hand resting on the sliding door, Yuki Onna stared back at Naruto. Master Naruto, if you ever want to talk about something, anything at all, you can always come to me, if you want. The silence that immediately followed her offer had Yuki Onna worried if she had maybe overstepped her bounds with the young man. It made sense considering they hadn't even known each other a year yet. He probably wasn't comfortable with the idea of confiding in her. Not to mention there is also the fact that, thank you, Yuki Onna uttered, blinking her eyes a couple of times in bewilderment, having been temporarily lost in thought and being drawn out of them by the sound of Naruto's voice. Her attention returning to the blonde, her breath hitched at the far more genuine smile that Naruto was now directing at her, a blush darkening her porcelain skin. Thank you, Naruto repeated, light returning to his eyes as he gazed at the girl with a heartwarming smile. For worrying about me, it means a lot, Sarara. He told her honestly. Naruto genuinely didn't care how long they knew one another. The fact that Sarara was concerned at all was the only thing that mattered. Yuki Onna's, or rather Sarara's, cheeks darkened further at Naruto's candid response. Heart rate spiking, Yuki Onna shook her hands wildly. Oh, it's nothing really, no need to thank me. I'm PPY to be of any help to you, Master Naruto. The girl got out in a hurried panic. Feeling self-conscious, Yuki Onna thought it best if she beat a hasty retreat before she did anything to embarrass herself. I should leave so you can get ready, the young woman declared quickly, closing the door not a second later, and the sound of her footsteps rushing off soon following. Ellipsis. As soon as Yuki Onna closed the door to her master's room, she found herself nearly running away as quickly as possible, losing the battle to keep her cheeks from turning any darker. Honestly, she was a little worried for her health if her face got any hotter. Unaware to the distracted Yuki Onna, a woman had turned the corner and was walking towards her. This woman had long wavy brown hair tied up in a ponytail with long bangs covering the right side of her face, revealing a single green eye. She wore a primarily white kimono with a red collar, the end of the sleeves and kimono were pink with a flower pattern. With a maroon sash tied around her waist and the top held loose, it was plainly clear that she possessed quite the voluptuous figure. Hey Yuki Onna, the woman greeted the younger girl. Did you she tried to ask only to be cut off before she could finish her question. Having been caught by surprise, distracted as she was, Yuki Onna reacted instinctively, breathing out an icy wind that froze the woman over. A second later she stopped blinking a couple of times as the realization of what she did hit her. Without even a word, Yuki Onna rushed past the frozen woman. It was a couple of seconds later the woman broke out of her icy prison, visibly shivering. Cold as she was, it did nothing to abate the anger that she felt from suddenly being frozen for no reason. Yuki Onna. Ellipsis. A woman stood in the kitchen preparing the food that would go into cooking the residence's breakfast, and with the numbers that lived in the compound that was no easy feat. A sudden shout from somewhere, however, drew her attention, causing her to stop as she tried to figure out what it was, though before she could, Yuki Onna came barging into the room, practically slamming the door behind her, resting her back against it. Yuki Onna. The woman called, causing the younger woman to jump. What's going on? Nothing. Nothing at all. Yuki Onna quickly exclaimed, quickly waving her hands in front of her face. I've woken Master Naruto like you asked. So should we get started on breakfast? Yuki Onna inquired, quick to divert the topic of conversation. Easily taking note of Yuki Onna's flustered state, the older woman was not at all convinced that nothing, in fact, happened. But like Yuki Onna reminded her, they had breakfast to prepare, so she'd leave it alone, for now. Ellipsis. Staring at the closed shoji doors, Naruto wondered what exactly had Yuki Onna suddenly acting so strange. Usually he had to force Yuki Onna away as she insisted on helping him get dressed in the mornings. Today she hadn't even mentioned it. Yuki Onna. Was that Kaoru? Naruto wondered to himself, the woman's sudden shout only adding to his confusion. It wasn't strange for the two women to argue with one another. Half of the time Naruto wasn't even sure what they were arguing about, just that it usually happened around him, but it's never happened this early in the day before. Especially when most of the compound's residents would still have been asleep. With a shake of his head, Naruto decided it was best if he started to get ready. For a second Naruto struggled to remove his nimaki, the kimono-like garment that he had worn to bed, desperately trying not to think about just why he was having such a difficult time. Even so, once the garment fell away, and he was just standing in a pair of boxers, Naruto couldn't help but look at a full-length mirror that stood on one side of the room. There was probably a couple of things that Naruto could have focused on, but really his attention was solely fixated on his missing right arm. Just one more reminder of what he's lost. A few minutes later, Naruto, now dressed in a black t-shirt and orange shorts, exited his room and took a moment to take in the sight with a bakudo in hand. Outside of his room there was a sakura tree and a small pond that Naruto believed offered quite a sight at night. Though it doesn't really compare to, Naruto was quick to shake away that thought. Instead, his attention turned toward the elderly man that was standing a few short feet away. Though the man was old, he was also remarkably fit, as evident by his exposed upper torso that still possessed a light muscled tone despite his age. He wore a green kimono, though currently the top half was currently hanging around his waist, and traditional Zori sandals. The oddest thing about the man was how his head protruded backwards like a gourd. In his hands was a bakudo, much like the one Naruto was currently carrying, and using it to practice. It was only a couple of seconds before the man noticed Naruto's presence. "Ah, Naruto. Finally up, I see," the man observed. "Well, come on then. Let's get started on your morning training before breakfast is finished." "Right," Naruto replied, moving to Saint. And across the man, bakudo held up at the ready. 1 second, they stood with several feet separating them. The next their wooden swords clashed and a medium gust of wind blew out from where they met. This man was Nurarihyun, the head of the Nura clan, the lord of pandemonium, the supreme commander of yokai, and the one who leads a night parade of 100 demons. He also happened to be Naruto's grandfather. An hour and a half later, Naruto sat in the compound's Genkan silently cursing shoelaces. He missed his sandals. They were a pain to learn to tie, but the alternative was to have someone else do it for him, and that made him feel like such a child. "Oh, leaving already?" A woman's voice came from behind Naruto, a hint of dejection in her voice. Naruto initially stiffened at the sound the woman's voice and took a couple of seconds before he could bring himself to relax. "Yeah, I need to get to school," Naruto stated evenly without turning to face the woman. Now anyone who knew Ruto was well aware that the blonde never spoke, evenly, especially when talking about school. He was loud, cheerful, passionate, some would even say annoying, but what no one can deny is that when he spoke there was always some sort of emotion fueling his words. Did you already eat breakfast? The woman continued, trying not to be discouraged by Naruto's reserved response. It was good. He complimented, though he still sounded detached. I'll probably stop by the dorm after school lets out, Naruto told her as he grabbed his school bag. Oh, okay, she answered even as Naruto left before she even finished. Once Naruto was gone, the woman couldn't help but let out a sigh at yet another failed attempt to bridge the gap between Naruto and her. Though at times it felt more like a chasm than a gap. Just give the boy a bit more time, Kushina. Nurarihyun spoke up, startling the woman a bit. Kushina Uzumaki, mother of Naruto, was a woman with long red hair and violet eyes wearing a short sleeved high-collared white blouse under a green dress. Turning to face the man, she found Nurarihyun not too far away, properly dressed in his usual clothing, holding the two bakudos that he and Naruto had been training with earlier. The man did his best to give the woman a supportive smile, knowing just how much it pained Kushina that Naruto was so withdrawn from her. I know, Kushina admitted, but knowing didn't make it any easier. She and Naruto were separated for so many years, which was in fact the problem, so now that she has been reunited with her son, she naturally wanted to spend time with him and get closer. But how much time? It's already been a year since we found him. She questioned. How long did it take for you to be at peace with being separated from him? Nurarihyun asked in return. Who says I'm at peace with it? Kushina replied. Even if she was happy to have been reunited with Naruto, that didn't mean that Kushina didn't still feel regret and anger at being separated from Naruto in the first place. Her child's first steps and words, comforting him when he was scared or taking care of him when he was sick, teaching him to use chakra, and celebrating in accomplishments. All those moments that Kushina missed out on were taken from her. From both her and Minato. Staring at Kushina, Nurarihyun struggled not to break out in a cold sweat. Most would describe Kushina as the loving and caring type, and they would be right, for the most part. When angered, however, Kushina had a temper far scarier than the fear that most yokai possessed. This was despite the fact that Kushina never managed to awaken the yokai blood that flowed through her veins as his daughter, probably because of the Uzumaki blood that flowed through those same veins. Right now, with the direction that her thoughts had turned, it was enough to make Nurarihyun think that even in his younger years it would have been very doubtful that he would win if he got in a fight. Kushina. I have to be very careful here, Nurarihyun thought as he very slowly tried to back away. One wrong move and she'll kill me. It was really hard to determine if that was true or just an exaggeration on his part. Well, Nurarihyun started, trying to be as unassuming as possible. My point is that Naruto had everything he knew taken from him when Konoha exiled him. At that, Nurarihyun felt a spike in Kushina's ki. Ling intent, and with it an increased worry for his safety. Then, just when he was building a new life here, Naruto experienced an unimaginable tragedy. It was only then, a mere 3 months later, had we found him only to take what remained of the life he knew and turned it all upside down. Are you saying it would have been better if we had never found Naruto, father? Kushina asked warningly. Of course not, Nurarihyun denied, furiously shaking his hands in front of him. What I am saying is that in 3 short years, time and time again Naruto has had his life torn apart. That is the sort of thing that would be a lot for anyone to deal with. Now, Naruto knows that it wasn't your choice to leave him, just as he knows that he is not being fair to you, but he needs time to reconcile very thing he thought he knew with what is in fact true. And he's told you as much. Of course, Nurarihyun confirmed. We do more than just beat each other with these bakudos. We talk too. Seeing how rocky things were between Kushina and Naruto, Nurarihyun naturally found himself acting as a mediator between the two. He wasn't especially worried that they would start fighting, but Nurarihyun did want to ensure that things didn't inadvertently become worse between the pair because of a failure to communicate. Plus, he got to make sure that Naruto was settling in all right while getting to know him better. So, Naruto's willing to open up to me eventually? The red-haired mother inquired hopefully. Kushina had done her best to get closer to Naruto while remaining respectful of the time and space that her son had asked for. But she worried at times if all her efforts were for naught and that tore at her. But having some reassurance from her father that Naruto didn't in fact hate her and was trying was a balm to her soul. He agreed to move in here even though that meant he'd inevitably see you every day. Nurarihyun pointed out before grinning. Besides, if he was really opposed to getting to know you, do you think that there is a force on this earth that could have made him move in? He is your son after all. Kushina couldn't help, not that she tried, the smile that spread acro. Her face or the sense of pride that swelled up within her at Nurarihyun's words. Because whether you called it stubbornness or determination, Naruto had definitely inherited it from her. Seeing his daughter in a better mood had Nurarihyun letting out a sigh of relief. He had gone from initially trying to cheer her up, to worrying for his safety, to assuring her and successfully cheering her up. I don't remember raising Rihan being this difficult, and Kushina is already a fully grown adult. Then there is Naruto, who is still a teenager. Between the two of them they just might manage to kill me. Nurarihyun thought with a bead of sweat on the side of his face. All right. Kushina cheered loudly with a wide smile, hands on her waist, drawing Nurarihyun from his thoughts. How about we spar for a bit now, old man? Nurarihyun balked at Kushina's suggestion. The redhead was a master with the sword and absolutely did not hold back when sparring with him. Well, I'm a little tired, the man said to dissuade her. Besides, I haven't had my breakfast yet, he complained. Well, think how much better it would taste afterwards, Kushina retorted. Like anything would taste better with the bruises you're going to give me, Nurarihyun muttered under his breath. Plus, he wouldn't put it past some of the others to not try and steal his food. Come on, hurry it up, Kushina urged, bakudo in hand. For a sec, Nurarihyun found himself staring at the bakudo that Kushina was holding, flabbergasted before looking at his own hand that was now missing said wooden sword. He hadn't yet managed to wrap his head around the fact that Kushina had somehow taken the bakudo from him without him realizing it when Kushina began to drag him away. Ring. As soon as the bell announcing the end of the school day start. To ring, Naruto was already out the door, leaving his classmates a little caught off guard to find the spot he previously occupied suddenly empty. But maybe they shouldn't be, it's not like this was an uncommon occurrence. While everyone was still gathering their things, Naruto was already walking out of the school gate. Normally the Uzumaki would spend a few minutes talking to his friends, as weird and annoying a couple of them were, and possibly make plans to hang out now that school was over for the day. But considering where he was going, he'd rather not be delayed if he could help it. Nothing to distract him. Naruto couldn't help but remember how he arrived to Japan. The simple answer though was that he didn't. After being banished by Konoha, Naruto felt like he was living in a daze. Weeks passing in the blink of an eye, as he traveled from place to place. He couldn't even remember the name of the places he had been to or people he could have met. Before he knew it, Naruto found himself on a ship traveling away from the elemental nations and the life he had as a shinobi. His intended destination was waylaid by a sudden storm that managed to capsize the ship. The fate of his ship's other passengers and crew were a mystery to Naruto. The next concise thought Naruto had was when he was being pulled out of the ocean. The elemental nations, as it turned out, existed within its own dimension by a space-time barrier, cut off yet a part of the world all at the same time. The veil that covered the elemental nations occasionally let people within the shroud out, and very rare. Why would let anyone into the elemental nations? How the barrier that enshrouded the shinobi world came to be was a mystery to everyone, as far as Naruto was aware, or how it worked exactly. When he came through the barrier, he had been right at the edge of it, which was generally considered a weak point in the barrier, and ended up in the ocean just on the other side of it. From what he had learned, his mother had only been a couple of inches from him, a couple of miles outside Konoha's walls, when she had been whisked away. Oddly enough, Kushina had ended up pretty much at the Nura clan's doorstep. And it was lucky that she had, because she was passed out at the time, and with the condition that she was in, it was unlikely that Kushina would have survived long enough to be rescued if she ended up in the ocean. That action implied that the barrier had some sort of sentience and was not actually limited to just surrounding the elemental nations. Like he said, it was a mystery. The people that had recused Naruto hadn't been there by chance. They knew about the barrier and about the elemental nations that resided on the other side. Regularly they had ships patrolling the area where they knew. The barrier frequently opened in case someone came through and they were a threat to the rest of the world. Usually, it was some unlucky sailor. Rarely it would be a shinobi, like himself, or a missing in. Those that came through were given the option of returning, if the barrier still happened to be open, joining them in the hope of returning to the elemental nations if the barrier had closed, starting a new life in the outside world. Or were killed if they proved to be a danger. With no life to return to, Naruto had chosen on joining them. Onmyoji exorcists, they were most well known for the banishment and extermination of evil spirits, and yokai. Actually, they were involved with anything that dealt with the supernatural. Which is why they were aware about the barrier and the elemental nations. After all, a hidden continent with people who could do what shinobi can with chakra was far from ordinary. His lineage as the grandson of Nurarihyun was something that the exorcists didn't know about. Would have made things rather awkward if they did. All they did know was that his mother turned out to be living in Japan and he was now living with her. The place he was going to visit now was called Seika Dormitory. It served as housing for exorcists and was Naruto's home before he moved into the newer compound, and after. Fire, the smell of smoke in the air. Bloody smears surrounded him, smears that had once been dear friends. Naruto viciously shook his head to rid himself of the memory. Another bad memory. Another failure. Naruto thought bitterly. It looked like he just couldn't shake his past today. And between the two it was hard for Naruto to decide which was worse. A few minutes later Naruto finally arrived at the Seika dormitory. The building was larger than most homes, that was a given since it was a dorm rather than a home, with a small yard. It was grand in its own way, but it didn't compare to the Nura clan home. While it might not have been as grandiose as the Nura home, Naruto couldn't deny that it had its own appeal. It served as his home for some time after all. "Yo!" Naruto called out loudly as he entered the dormitory and ventured inside with the familiarity of someone who's lived there. The first person to appear was an old man with long gray hair, beard, and mustache. He wore large round glasses and had two bangs that framed his face. The man wore a simple blue track suit with white strips and a white t-shirt. His name was Zenkichi Otami, affectionately called Jisama by the residents of the dormitory, an exorcist and the head of the Seika dormitory. "Well, isn't this a nice surprise? What brings you by, Naruto?" Jisama asked. "I just decided to stop by for a quick visit, see how everyone is doing, geezer," Naruto answered. Jisama felt his eyebrow twitching at the response before he let out a long-suffering sigh. "Having known you for a while now, I don't know why I keep hoping that someday you'll be a little more respectful," the man muttered. "I was at least sure that Kushina-san would have done something about it by now," he added. "Bwahahaha." Naruto burst into an uproarious laughter, nearly doubling over as he held his stomach. For nearly a minute Naruto laughed loud enough to be heard throughout the dormitory. Jisama was forced to stand by silently, eyebrow twitching violently, as anything short of shouting would fail to be heard by the blonde. Eventually, after a couple more minutes, Naruto calmed down. "Mom would be the last person to get mad at me for not being respectful," Naruto told the man honestly. When he was first starting to get to know his mother, Naruto was taken back by just how similar their personalities were to one another. It wasn't long before Naruto could hear the sound of footsteps approaching. No doubt drawn by the sound of Naruto's laughter. Three boys, all a few years older than Naruto, emerged, their looks of curiosity turning to welcoming smiles as they spotted their former dorm mate. First Naruto recognized as Shinosuke Kuzuki, a boy with purple hair that fell just above his shoulders and bangs that usually covered his eyes. Next was a guy with a faux hawk hairstyle and with the exception of the red streak that was the midline portion, he had brown hair with a small ponytail. His name was Atsushi Tsukumozuka. Personality-wise, the duo reminded him of his former friends, Shino Aburame and Kiba Inuzuka. Shinosuke was normally calm and collected, and Atsushi was rather confident and didn't hesitate to let others know what he thought. Of course, neither Shinosuke or Atsushi were as silent or brash as the Konoha genin. The final member of the trio was Ryogo Najitsuji, and whose face lit up the most once he spotted Naruto, the oldest and the leader of the group. He had black hair that spiked upward, as opposed to Naruto's sea urchin-like hair, with some of it tied into a braid on the right side of his face. When Naruto had first arrived in Japan and was acclimating to his new environment, he had been put under Ryogo's care. Things were a little awkward. At first, after being betrayed and banished from his former home, Naruto wasn't willing to just open up to the first person he met. Ryogo though was persistent and earnest, and if there was one thing that Naruto knew, it was that he didn't want to be anything like Sasuke, constantly pushing people away who wanted to do nothing but help him. Growing up isolated, Naruto also knew that the last thing he wanted was to go back to being alone. So, slowly but surely the two became friends, and from that friendship they became brothers in everything but blood. Sadly, Naruto had to frequently shake off the memories of the only other person he thought of that way. Naruto, Ryogo greeted his surrogate little brother. I was wondering what all that noise was about, he joked. Naruto grinned widely in return. Jisama was talking about how he'd thought Mom would have taught me to be respectful to my elders by now. The blue-eyed shinobi told him. Ryogo made a valiant effort, but it wasn't quite enough to keep himself from snorting in amusement. Having met the woman, Ryogo was sure that any attempts on her part to teach Naruto to be respectful would be counterproductive, when she would then do the exact opposite. Is that so? He spoke, trying to stifle his laughter. Jisama felt his eyebrow twitching in exasperation. Maybe he had been naively optimistic, but a man could dream, couldn't he? As the old man watched Shinosuke and Atsushi move to greet Naruto, he felt his annoyance drain away and instead be replaced by a small smile. It might not last long, but it was nice to have everyone together at the dormitory once more. Actually, Ryogo started with an excited look in his eyes. It's good that you're here, Naruto. Now you can join us on a job, the youth told him. For the first time, Naruto noticed that all three boys were dressed in the white robe uniform of the exorcists, making it clear that they were about to head out. No. The blonde immediately refused, turning his head away. I've told you before, I'm never going to be an exorcist again and don't want anything to do with it, Naruto stated resolutely. Ryogo frowned sadly at how adamant Naruto was being, but he didn't want Naruto to be stuck lamenting the past for the rest of his life. Especially when he had seen the awe-inspiring potential Naruto had as an exorcist. More than that though was the sense of purpose that Naruto exuberated when performing his duties as an exorcist. Since that day Naruto had been, well, Ryogo wouldn't say that Naruto was going through the motions, but he lacked a certain spark that he previously possessed. What Ryogo wanted more than anything was to reignite that spark within Naruto. At least finding his mom had brought Naruto, as awkward as it might be between them, some peace. I should get going, Naruto voiced out, keeping Ryogo from making any further attempts at convincing him to join in on their mission. Gramps wanted me home early. He figured that it was for another meeting his grandfather wanted him to attend, as pointless as Naruto thought it was. Besides, even knowing he was coming here, the others would undoubtedly start to worry if he stayed too long. Alright then, we won't keep you, Ryogo relented with only the lightest of frowns. But, he continued, in the next couple of days, we'll be having guests. Do you think you might be able to come by to greet them? The black-haired young man finished. Naruto stared at Ryogo suspiciously for a second, wondering if this was another attempt by the guy to make him become an exorcist again. Not like it will make much of a difference, Naruto silently thought to himself. Sure, Naruto answered offhandedly before leaving after saying his goodbyes to the others. With Naruto gone, Atsushi couldn't contain something that had been bothering him for a while now. Hey Ryogo, Atsushi began, drawing the older boy's attention to him. Aren't you being too persistent with Naruto? He questioned. I mean, I get that he's a good guy, but aren't you going out of the way to get him to be an exorcist again? It just doesn't seem to be worth the trouble. Atsushi voiced his thoughts, and though he didn't say anything, Shinosuke did nod his head in agreement. Ryogo nodded his head to show he understood where the others were coming from before he turned his attention back to the door Naruto just exited from. You two know about the hidden continent, right? He asked them in turn. Shinosuke tilted his head thoughtfully as that name sounded familiar. That's the Shinobi Nations, right? He answered a little unsurely, because even though the secret of the continent that was veiled away was common knowledge to exorcists in large, it had been a long while since he had heard of it. Atsushi's eyes lit up brightly as he remembered as well. Yeah, the home of all the ninja, the teen said exuberantly. Ryogo rolled his eyes in amusement before continuing. Naruto was originally from the hidden continent, Konohagakure no Sato was his home. Ryogo divulged. Atsushi and Shinosuke mouths hung open slightly at the revelation. So, wait, Naruto's a ninja. Atsushi exclaimed disbelievingly. While still processing the information, Shinosuke placed his hand against his chin pensively. If I remember correctly, shinobi have a ranking system depending on experience and power. What was Naruto's rank? He asked curiously. Genin, Ryogo answered a little awkwardly, scratching his cheek. Even with his eyes hidden by his bang's eye. It was clear that Shinosuke was staring at Ryogo incredulously. Isn't that like the lowest rank for shinobi? The sheepish smile that Ryogo gave in response was enough of an answer for his question. Having been following the conversation, Atsushi let out a frustrated yell as she scratched his head furiously. Then what's the point? If he's so lowly ranked, then even if he is a ninja, that shouldn't make him that much better than the rest of us. He stated loudly, only to be met with silence. Right. Atsushi finished, unsure. Jisama let out a sigh, drawing the boy's attention to himself. Well, what I have come to understand, shinobi are trained from a young age and taught how to use chakra, giving them superhuman abilities. Even as a genin, Naruto could easily outpace most athletes. He informed them, to the astonishment of two of the boys. Seriously. Even Shinosuke couldn't help but voice his disbelief. Shinobi are so much more than your average human being. Jisama said sagely, not even getting into everything that shinobi could do with chakra. Now, as much as I would like to continue gossiping with you boys, I do believe that you had a mission that we're supposed to get to. He reminded them. It took a moment as Ryogo, Shinosuke, and Atsushi stared at one another in confusion before realization struck them. With a loud shout from each of them, the three panicked TNS scrambled to get the last of their gear before they set out. As Naruto left the dormitory, he knew that it would only be a couple of minutes before his guards showed up. They, along with most of the other yokai of the newer clan, weren't exactly keen on being too close to exorcists. So, whenever he decided to visit Ryogo and the others, his two guards would be anxiously waiting as close by as they would dare. A chuckle reverberated from the confines of Naruto's mind that didn't even slow his stride in the slightest. I wonder if that boy would be so fixated on convincing you to be an exorcist again if he knew that you were one of the things he was taught to hunt. The Kyuubi no Kitsune wondered from within its seal. Naruto didn't reply, sigh, or even roll his eyes. At some point after his banishment, the Kyuubi started to talk to him, or rather the Kyuubi made snide comments that usually lead to arguments. Yet, in spite of their constant arguing, neither was particularly inclined to stop. Shut up, Naruto replied impassively. What's the matter, brat? Still can't accept that the villagers were right when they called you a monster? That you were never human? The Kyuubi mocked. His time. Naruto couldn't help the snort if he wanted. If there is one thing living in Konoha taught me, Naruto retorted mentally, it's that it doesn't matter if you're human or yokai, people will treat you however they want. He thought gruffly. As far as Naruto was aware, no one in Konoha knew about his lineage. It was something that Kushina didn't know until finding herself outside the veil, so their prejudice towards him was all their own. But because of it, at the very least, it made accepting his heritage easier. After a lifetime of being called a demon, and developing a thick skin because of it, finding out that he was actually a yokai didn't really change anything for him. He was who he was, no matter what anyone else said. Master Naruto. A voice shouting his name drew Naruto from his thoughts and cut off his conversation with the Kyuubi before it inevitably escalated. Standing several feet away and doing a poor job of being inconspicuous were his two bodyguards. The first, and who had called out to him, was Yuki Onna, though she looked slightly different from how she did that morning. The most obvious was that she was wearing his school's female uniform, though she still wore her scarf. But with a closer look, other more significant differences were obvious. Her hair was mostly the same, only the white part wasn't prevalent, and her eyes, instead of being a golden color, were a deep purple. The person next to her was Aotobo, and like Yuki Onna, his appearance was different than what he usually looked like. As a yokai, Aotobo was a fully grown man, muscular, and taller than the average person. His typical clothing consisted of an iron blue robe, worn underneath a black cloak with a cream-colored furry collar that was connected by a skull rosary. Which, in all honesty, Freya Ked Naruto out a bit as he never quite built up the courage to ask if those were human skulls, afraid of what the answer would be. He had tanned skin, pure white eyes, and brushed back spiky white hair. The disguise he used right now though had his form shrunken down to the size of a teenager, still rather tall and well built for his age, wearing the same black uniform as Naruto. His tanned skin was a shade or two lighter. White hair now a dark brown that could have passed off as black, and steel gray eyes. "You're okay," Yuki Onna exclaimed, sounding relieved. "I'm so glad, I was worried." Yuto did his best to offer the girl a reassuring smile to ease her concern. As exasperating as it was that his grandfather assigned him guards, Naruto did appreciate how genuinely concerned Yuki Onna and all the other members of Nura clan were for him. "You guys didn't have to follow me, you know. I'm safe here," Naruto assured her. Yuki Onna and Aotobo wanted to argue against their young master's claim. The long history between yokai and exorcists making most yokai rather wary of exorcists. But Naruto's known past with the exorcists complicated things though. After all, their master was saved by the human organization, and even after living amongst them Naruto had accepted his heritage, and all of them, without batting an eye. So, while being cautious of exorcists still seemed to be rather natural and prudent. To the pair, painting all exorcists with the same brush would mean insinuating the same thing of their young master. Even so, Aotobo pressed on. "Karasu Tengu wanted us to make sure that you got home early tonight," he informed. Naruto tilted his head in confusion. "Why?" the blonde questioned, although he had a pretty good idea already. Karasu Tengu was an advisor of his grandfather, with an unquestionable loyalty to the Nura clan. The small yokai tended to handle the day-to-day operations of the clan that his grandfather was too lazy to do himself, and tendency to badger Naruto about what was expected of him as Nurarihyone's heir. "It is time for the general meeting," Aotobo answered. Naruto let out a tired sigh but nodded his head anyway. "Let's go," he spoke. The general meeting was a gathering of all the heads of the families, and their subordinates, that had sworn loyalty to his grandfather. It really wasn't any different than Konoha's council meetings, except the members weren't idiot assholes. Well, most of them weren't. Arriving home, Naruto wasn't all that surprised to find many of the yokai rushing about to get everything ready for the general meeting that was to take place. "Ah, there you are, Master Naruto, welcome home," a familiar voice greeting the blonde. Turning to face the one who called out to him, Naruto saw a crow-like yokai flying towards him that he recognized as Karasu Tengu. Karasu Tengu had a large round head with red eyes and a dark red token on his forehead. He wore traditional cream-colored robes, with prayer beads around his neck and tabi on his feet. While he was a crow, he had a human-like body, though a very small one, and large wings sprouting from his back. "I trust that you've been informed of the general meeting that is to take place." "Yeah," Naruto said, rolling his eyes. The gesture wasn't missed by Karasu Tengu. "Master, I know that you find the meetings boring and tedious, but as the Supreme Commander's heir it is necessary that you attend," the small crow yokai claimed. Naruto did his best to hold back a snort at that. Whether or not he would be the Nura clan's third heir and the next Supreme Commander had to be officially agreed upon by the council until he proved that he could actually become a yokai. His mother's own inability to do the same thing was what kept her from ascending to the same position. As it stands, Karasu Tengu continued unabated. "Lord Zen is already here and had asked to speak with you." "He is?" Naruto repeated, his interest piqued. Zen was the head of one of the sub-clans that made up the Nura clan. And as such part of its council, he was also not only friendly towards Naruto but actively advocated for his ascension as the Nura clan's next leader. "Oh, I'll go make some tea," chirped Yuki Onna before she scurried off to carry out her self-assigned task. Knowing that Zen was there to see him, Naruto quickly made his way to the room where the man was waiting. Upon entering, Naruto was greeted with the sight of a young man, only a few years older than him, about Ryogo's age, or at least looked like it, sitting waiting patiently. He has very light brown hair that turned black near the base of his neck and red eyes with small pupils. He had pale skin, almost unnaturally so, and wore a dark blue haori with red accents along the sleeves and collar over a purple kimono. "Master Naruto," Zen happily greeted the younger boy the moment he walked into the room, a wide smile spreading across his face. "It's good to see you, it's been a while." Hiya Zen, Naruto greeted. In return taking a seat across from him, doing his best to pretend he didn't notice the many eyes and whispered conversations coming from above them. Naruto didn't know if they were trying to be sneaky in their eavesdropping or not because they were doing a very poor job of it. It's good to see you too. So have you played any pranks recently? Zen asked eagerly. None worth mentioning. Naruto replied with a small laugh. Living in a house of yokai had taught Naruto one thing, and that was that yokai appreciated a good prank, as long as they weren't the ones on the receiving end. Zen sagged a little in disappointment. But before he could comment on it, a knock was heard from the shoji doors. Excuse me Master Naruto, Lord Zen, I've brought some tea for you. Yuki Onna announced before she slid door open to reveal her kneeling with a tray of freshly made tea at her side. As Yuki Onna moved to stand so she could serve them, she accidentally ended up tripping on her own kimono. Unfortunately, Naruto suffered from Yuki Onna's accident as the hot tea ended up spilling on him. Gah! Hot! 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 The former Konoha shinobi shouted in pain. Seeing the distress that Naruto was going through sent Yuki Onna into a panic. Master Naruto, I'm so sorry, Yuki Onna shouted frantically. In her panic as she fretted over the boy, Yuki Onna could only think of one thing to do. So, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath, Yuki Onna released an icy wind that encased Naruto in a thin layer of ice. Yuki Onna. Zen grounding out her name and the snickers coming from above her caused Yuki Onna tea. Oh snap, her eyes opened to see the state that she had left her young master in. Tears quickly welled up in her eyes. What are you doing? How dare you treat Master Naruto, my sworn brother, with such disrespect? There will be no mercy for you. Zen roared angrily. I'm sorry, please forgive me. Yuki Onna shouted out before she fled from the room crying big fat tears. No sooner had Yuki Onna left the room than the ice that surrounded Naruto shattered, leaving the shivering blonde completely unharmed. Well, now that we've got that out of the way, Zen began his composure, doing a 180 as he smiled at the blonde. Don't make it sound like we were doing some sort of bit. Naruto muttered, teeth chattering a little bit, vehemently ignoring the sniggering coming from above. Zen continued acting like he didn't hear a word that Naruto said. I must apologize for not attending the clan's general meetings recently. Don't worry about it. Recovering from the sudden cold, Naruto waved off Zen's apology. You're not missing much. It's mostly just a lot of grandstanding by everyone. Come now master, as the third heir you shouldn't be so dismissive. Zen chastised the younger boy lightly. But your health is more important, so don't force yourself for something that doesn't really matter. Naruto refuted before letting out a sigh. Besides, I haven't exactly been officially recognized. As the Newer clan's third heir by the council. He pointed out. Some of them aren't exactly I'm being allowed to attend at all. Zen scowled, a growl emanating from the back of his throat. What are those fools thinking? The man demanded lowly. It's bad enough that they pulled this crap with Lady Kushina, but now they have the audacity to do it to you as well. Well, it makes sense. The blonde commented. A human can't exactly be the leader of all yokai. Naruto stated before his gaze shifted to his missing arm, a sorrowful look crossing his face, as his remaining hand grabbed the sleeve of his school blazer. Besides, I'm hardly someone you should want to have as a leader. The building frustration Zen was starting to feel drained away at the expression that Naruto was sporting. It was one he was quite familiar with. The crushing weight of being burdened with something they couldn't escape. For Zen it was his ever-encroaching death because of his own yokai body, for Naruto it was the regret of his failures. Master Naruto, Zen spoke gently, drawing the younger boy's attention. Please know that no matter what you might think of yourself, that we, believe in you. That there isn't anyone more fitting to lead the Newer clan than you. He claimed with absolute conviction. Naruto stared at the man with wide open eyes, not quite believing what he just heard, as the purring of the yokai around them grew in a crescendo, all voicing their agreement with Zen's words. After a while Naruto lowered his head so that his hair covered his eyes, unable to come up with the words to respond before he finally stood up and made to leave. As Naruto reached the threshold of the room, he paused before looking over his shoulder to stare at Zen. Zen felt himself tense as he was read down by Naruto, the boy's blue eyes steeled and demanding compliance. Zen, don't you ever threaten Yuki Onna again. Naruto warned him and proceeded to leave. Alright, Zen agreed shakingly fine. G himself inexplicably saluting the younger teens retreating back. Ellipsis. Thank you all for coming, now that everyone is present, we can commence with the general meeting. Thank you all for coming, now that everyone is present. We can commence with the general meeting. Flying in the center of the room, Karasu Tengu gave his greeting to those who had gathered before moving to sit slightly behind and to the right of Nurarihyun. Naruto stared at the small crow yokai from the corner of his eye on his grandfather's other side before he turned his attention forward again. Sitting with his grandfather and Karasu Tengu, the three of them sat at the head of the room with the chairmen of the clans on either side of the room facing one another. Of the yokai gathered here, some looked remarkably human, others couldn't be confused for anything but yokai. Naruto recognized every single one of them, their names, and even what kind of yokai they were. He was admittedly better acquainted with some of them than others, like Zen for example. Although currently the man was making it quite apparent that he was ignoring Naruto by refusing to look in his direction, drawing more than a few curious glances from the other gathered attendants. Some the blonde Uzumaki wished he didn't know at all. Hitatsum Nayudo, a one-eyed yokai with the appearance of a man from feudal Japan with a thick black beard, was one such yokai. The man was undoubtedly a loyal subordinate of his grandfather, but Hitatsum also made it readily clear that he didn't consider Naruto worthy to succeed Nurarihyun as leader of the Nura clan. Now Hitatsum was annoying and a braggart of a yokai, but despite the low opinion that he had of Naruto, he was hardly the worst member of the Nura clan in the blonde's eyes. No, that title went to the yokai sitting closest to him on his left. Gagos, chairman of the Gagos Alliance, was a yokai that wore a tattered cloak with long dark seaweed-like hair and a face not unlike that of an Oni mask. Currently Naruto was forced to listen as the yokai crowed about his latest evil deeds. Now yokais were wildly considered evil and as such did evil things, though what constituted as evil varied from yokai to yokai. His own grandfather, for example, the supreme commander of the yokai, evilest acts committed these days involved skimping out on paying for meals when he went out and stealing candy from the local stores. Like Nurarihyun, the day-to-day lives of most members of Nura clan were rather peaceful. But not Gagos and his faction. Gagos's desire was to be named Nurarihyun Tsuchi. Zurin was not the least bit ashamed of letting everyone know. Unfortunately, there was actually a very remote possibility that he'd obtain his ambition. While nothing had been made official, Naruto had been made privy to rumors around the compound that two other branches of the Nura clan were willing to support Gagos's bid to become the leader of the Nura clan if he was ever formally nominated. Of course, Naruto being, well, alive kind of threw a wrench in Gagos's plans. But trying to become the next leader of the Nura clan in his place was not the reason that Naruto disliked the yokai so much. No, it was because total number of children that I've had kidnapped and eaten this year alone. Gagos boasted proudly. He was a monster, a real scum of the earth type. Being yokai, Naruto understood that their morals at times were vastly different from a human. As a shinobi, Naruto knew that he didn't share the exact same principles as the normal civilians, especially those on this side of the veil. But even still, it took a great amount of effort for Naruto not to outright attack the cloaked yokai. Naruto did take some comfort that not all the members of the council seemed to be pleased with Gagos's actions. Though Naruto couldn't get a clear read on what his grandfather thought. He did not praise Gagos like some of the others did, but he wasn't discouraging what Gagos did either. It seems you're working hard. And the Supreme Commander did not make another comment on it. Honestly, Naruto didn't know what he would do, or what would happen, if Gagos ever did become the leader of the Nura clan. Well, Naruto thought as he did his best to ignore Gagos's existence. I guess that as long as Gramps doesn't decide to suddenly name him the heir, it will be fine. He decided. Besides, like he told Zen earlier, as a human he really couldn't lead a bunch of yokai even if he wanted to. Supreme Commander. When it comes to evildoing, there is no one who can compare to Lord Gagos. So wouldn't he be the perfect candidate to be named as the third heir? Someone boldly suggested, causing Naruto, and a good number of others, to freeze. What kind of idiot would go and outright say something like that? Nurarihyun gave Gagos a piercing gaze before he shook his head and a wide grin spread across his face. Sorry Gagos, but it simply can't be you, he claimed before thrusting his head toward Naruto. Because when it comes to the third heir, I think I'll leave it to this one here. Even though everyone had been aware of Nurarihyone's intentions before hearing him state it. Again still didn't fail to drive the entire room into a chaotic mess. Now despite the frenzied state of the room, with everyone trying to shout over one another to be heard, a few didn't miss how Gagos growled at Naruto. Certainly not the person it was directed at. Ellipsis. Naruto moved to sit by his grandfather at the veranda several hours later, the general meeting long having come to an end and its members having returned to their respective homes. What exactly are you thinking, old man? The former Konoha shinobi questioned. Whatever do you mean, Naruto? Nurarihyon asked back, feigning obliviousness. You know I can't become the third heir, I'm not a yokai. Naruto stated. It was something that everyone was aware of but had never actually been willing to bring up to Nurarihyon before. Nurarihyon smirked at his grandson. So sure, are you? Do you forget whose blood flows through your veins? The same blood that flows through mom's veins. Naruto retorted. And she never awoke that blood. The old yokai let out a sigh before he waved it off. While that was unfortunate, all it would ultimately have meant is that instead of the third you would have been the fourth, like your father. Yeah, like dad. Naruto muttered. There had been another shock. Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage, the man that he had looked up to all his life and who had sealed the Kyuubi inside, was his father. His mom of course had told him everything that happened the night that he was born and what led up to his father's actions. It was a hard pill to swallow, and while Naruto understood why his father did what he did, it was still rather hard to accept. Not noticing his grandson's sudden downtrodden expression, Nurarihyon continued, nonplussed. Just give it some time and I'm sure that in the end, you will more than prove yourself deserving to be named the Nuru clan's third heir and its future leader. Nurarihyon encouraged his grandson. With a relieved groan, Naruto stretched out from his seat at his desk as another school day came to an end. Naruto never considered himself an exemplary student, academically speaking, but since arriving in Japan and being enrolled in school, much to his vehement protests, the former Konoha shinobi did his best to excel at his studies. Having people who cared about how he was doing in school certainly played a part in it. It was sort of a blessing and a curse. Now, unlike yesterday before Naruto could gather his things, a group gathered around his desk, cutting off his escape. Uzumaki, the apparent leader of the group, communicated, drawing said Uzumaki's attention. The one who spoke up was a male with wavy black hair that fell around his face with sharp dark brown eyes. His name was Kyotsugu Kyojuji. He had a rather strong personality that, along with his rather rich background, which he did a very poor job of being humble about if he even tried to be, made it so the young man always pushed to have things seen his way. While Naruto found Kyotsugu trying at times, and rather formal, he wasn't a bad person. Though that didn't keep Naruto from occasionally wondering how they were friends exactly. Next was the only other male member of the group, Jiroshima. He had small dark eyes and short blonde hair. Shima, as most tended to call him, was a close friend of Kyotsugu, oftentimes coming off as being his minion, supporting Kyotsugu's ideas and always going along with anything he suggested. Like himself, they both wore the school's male uniform of a black blazer and pants. A classic. The remaining three members of the small group were obviously girls, each of them wearing the female uniform of a beige sweater with a large blue collar and a blue pleated skirt. First was Natsumi Torii, who had cat-like gray blue eyes and black hair she always had pulled back into a ponytail. Standing beside her was her best friend Sorimaki, a young woman with straight blonde hair and hazel-colored eyes. From what Naruto had figured out, the TWO were childhood friends and rarely apart from one another. The final member of the group was the likeliest reason that the group stayed together like it did. With shoulder-length blonde hair that faded into pastel green and blue eyes, Miura Otami was his friend, and without a doubt the one that Naruto was closest to amongst those gathered around his desk. Probably helped by the fact that he knew her longer than the others. Even if only by a few months. Kind and a generally happy person, Miura is the daughter of the man who taught Naruto everything he knew when it came to being an exorcist. Then her sweet and gentle, couldn't hurt a fly demeanor. It was hard to believe that Miura's family have been exorcists for several generations. Honestly, she reminded him a lot of one. Naruto mentally shook his head to stave off the melancholy that would often plague him whenever memories of the past would surface. Instead, He turned his focus back to Kiyotsugu. Are you free today? The black-haired teen questioned. Not really. Naruto answered, I have to run a quick errand. Why? He asked in turn. Because we're going out to hunt yokai. Kiyotsugu announced grandly. Looking towards the off-rs Naruto easily picked up on the fact that none of them were nearly as enthusiastic as Kiyotsugu was. Looking back at the taller boy, Naruto gave him a strange look. I thought you didn't believe in yokai. The Uzumaki pointed out. A few months ago, Kiyotsugu and Shima had given a class report, led of course by Kiyotsugu, disproving the existence of yokai, and ever since then Kiyotsugu had been obsessed with them. Tut, tut, tut. Kiyotsugu chided lightly, shaking a finger back and forth. Au contraire, to prove the existence of yokai one must first acknowledge everything that says they don't exist. Acknowledging and understanding the opposition is the best way to overcome it. He declared proudly. Naruto wasn't the only one was now giving Kiyotsugu a strange look, though it was Natsumi who voiced their collective question. So do you think yokai exist or don't you? She questioned. Both. Kiyotsugu claimed joyfully. To uncover the truth, we must shed any all biases so that we might accept whatever we unearth. Naruto found himself just shaking his head, trying to understand Kiyotsugu's reasoning would probably just lead at the former shinobi just tearing at his hair. Well, like I have a couple of errands to run today, sorry. Naruto said, offering a not-so-sincere apology. Kiyotsugu waved off the apology easily enough. Don't worry about it, I am sure that there will be plenty of opportunities for you to join us in the future. The teen claimed readily before addressing the others. All right everyone, we are heading out. He cheered, trying to rouse everyone's enthusiasm to match his own. His attempt fell rather short. Still the others followed as he began to lead them away, except for Miura, who stayed behind gazing at Naruto. For his part, Naruto just stared back at Miura with a curious look quickly spreading across his face. If Naruto had learned anything about Miura in the last couple of years of being her friend, it was how unpredictable her train of thought really was. Hey, I guess I know now how Kakashi-sensei felt when he called me. Again, Naruto shook off those thoughts, focusing instead on the here and now. What's up, Miura? Aren't you going with the others? He asked. Miura nodded her head in response, but her brows furrowed in concern as she did. Are you okay? She asked him back. Miura considered herself rather empathetic to others, so she had noticed how down Naruto had been yesterday, though hadn't been able to talk to him about it because of how quickly he left, and had certainly not missed how his mood dropped a couple of times just now. If even just for a split second. I'm fine, Naruto said, giving her the best reassuring grin that he could manage. I've just had a lot on my mind recently. Despite his best attempt, Miura sure didn't feel like her mind was at ease. But she was savvy enough to know that if she pressed Naruto about it, all she would accomplish was to annoy the blonde and cause him to shut her out. So, she held her tongue and nodded her head acceptingly. Okay, but if you need to talk about something, I'm here. Miura offered. Before Naruto could answer, Kiyotsugu's voice shouted back into the room, drawing their attention. Hey Otami, what's the hold up? We have yokai to hunt down. He exclaimed, and faintly Naruto thought he could hear the girls reprimanding Kiyotsugu for being so impatient and shouting indoors. With a look back at Naruto and getting a nod in return, Miura said her goodbyes and walked off to join the others. Crossing a bridge, as he walked through town on his way to the Seika dorm, Naruto was checking his phone. A plastic bag hanging off his arm around his elbow, to make sure that he had gotten everything that Ryogo had asked for after the older teen had texted him a list of grocery items they needed. He asks me to stop by to meet whoever and then has me go grocery shopping for him. Naruto grumbled internally, putting his phone away, though even to himself it sounded half-hearted. More than annoyed, Naruto was curious about who would be visiting the dorms. Hardly anyone actually stayed at the Seika dormitory, and the only one who stopped by with any regularity was Sei. Before he even knew what he was doing, Naruto turned to face the river, arm pulled back, ready to throw the bag over the side of the bridge. Like hell, I'm getting dinner for Naruto's actions, and thou. GHTS came to a sudden stop as he saw a girl falling headfirst into the river right in front of him. Again, Naruto's body moved all on its own, dropping his backpack and the bag of groceries, as he drew MPED after the girl, wrapping his arm around her and drawing her close. It was only after Naruto was holding the girl that his eyes widened, realizing what he had just done, and that gravity decided reinsert itself. With a strangled gasp, Naruto and the unconscious girl fell into the river down below. Struggling more than he would like to admit, with only one arm and a half-forgotten instinct on how to perform the water walking exercise, Naruto got them out of the river and trudged their way to shore. The fall into the river seemed to have been enough to rouse the girl, as she was already beginning to stir by the time that Naruto had them on solid ground. Knowing how dangerous it was to be close to someone who had passed out only to find stranger in their face when they first woke up, Naruto chose to gently set the girl on the ground and step away. Sitting up, the girl looked around in confusion, looking down at her drenched clothing, before setting her sights on Naruto and noting his own waterlogged clothes. It wasn't hard for the girl to come to the correct conclusion on what happened after she fell unconscious as she picked herself up off the ground. "Hey, are you alright?" Naruto asked the girl. As if suddenly falling out the sky wasn't bad enough, but to do it while passed out was even worse. Where did she even fall from? The blonde silently wondered. The girl didn't answer Naruto's question, only sparing him a quick glance as she began to wring out her clothing. While annoyed that he was being ignored, Naruto couldn't help but to take this chance to check the girl out. She had a slender figure wearing a black school uniform that he didn't recognize. She had long black hair with what looked like to Naruto a purple tint to it, which fell down to her waist, and while it was redly matted down from the brief look he got of her while she was falling, Naruto was sure that it was just as straight then as it was now. Two pink hair bobbles tied her hair so two bangs framed her face. She had green eyes that Naruto would compare to emeralds. Although he didn't fail to notice the dull look in her eyes, it was well hidden. Naruto could also see an icy aloofness and determination in her gaze that stood at the forefront, but it was something that he was more than acquainted with. He's seen it in his own eyes often enough each time he looked in the mirror after all. Naruto's Ro's thoughts came to a screeching halt when he watched the girl pull up her long skirt to get rid of the water that had been soaked into it, exposing her thigh just above her long socks. Distracted as he was, Naruto's eyes snapped to the holster strapped to her thigh. Ceiling tags was Naruto's first thought before mentally shaking his head as he got a better look. No, talismans. The blonde corrected himself. He could barely spot something else strapped on her other leg, but at this angle it was mostly being hidden by her leg too. From what Naruto could infer, this mystery girl was most likely an exorcist of some kind. Or a cosplayer. This was Japan after all. But probably not. Probably. Naruto was brought out his musings when he saw the girl pull a paper out of a pocket of her skirt. Unfolding it, she gave it a confused look for a second, going as far as tilting her head to the side, before fixing her attention on Naruto. A couple of quick strides and the girl was holding out the paper for Naruto to take. Confused, Naruto still found himself accepting the, understandably, sopping wet, piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked, but received no answer. Squinting his eyes, Naruto thought that he might be looking at what used to be a map. Used to be because after taking a dip in the river it was now a lot of illegible smudges too. Naruto deadpanned as he stared back at the girl. And considering the confused look she had been sporting, she was clearly hoping that he'd have better luck deciphering it. Yeah, there was no chance of that happening. Naruto was sure to tell her as much. "I can't read any of this," he stated, handing the ruined map back. A second later, Naruto wasn't sure if he should laugh or feel annoyed at the expression the girl now wore. With a deep scowl, frown that marred her otherwise beautiful features, her head tilted slightly to the side, and eyes staring in the same direction, she gave the air of someone who was having to deal with someone particularly irritating. Still, the girl took her map back as she made another attempt at figuring out what all the blobs could mean. For a minute Naruto just found himself staring at the girl expectantly, only to go on being ignored. "Do you mind explaining how you fell out of the sky?" Naruto questioned, though by the way that she turned her back to him it was obvious that she had no intention of answering him. Is there any particular reason that you are following me? Naruto asked the girl, who like he said was walking behind him as she stared at her ruined map. While a part of him was curious when the girl refused to explain herself, the part of him that didn't want to get involved with exorcist matters won out and he decided to just leave, returning to the bridge to gather his things. What he wasn't expecting was to pick up on the sound of footsteps following him or to see the girl standing only a couple feet away after grabbing his bag. At first Naruto was willing to write it off as the girl using the bridge to serve as a sort of landmark as she continued to make senses of the map that she was still holding. But after several minutes of aimless walking in Vari's rondo, stops and turns, it was quickly made obvious that she was shadowing him. She shook her head in answer. Well, at least she actually answered this time. Naruto mused. So, I guess from that uniform and the map you're not from around here. Naruto continued to question her. In lieu of giving a verbal response, the girl nodded her head once as she turned the map one way then another, trying to make heads or tails of it. Where are you from? The blonde continued to question. The girl just sighed as she gazed at Naruto, eyebrow raised, wondering why he insisted on asking so many questions. As Naruto stared back at her, he started feeling a little awkward as the realization that she hadn't once said anything since they met. I'm sorry, I didn't think that, but can you not talk? In response girl shook her head in denial before a despondent look crossed her face. Making small talk is troublesome. Naruto gave the girl a look of disbelief at her words. Seriously, even Shikamaru wasn't that bad. The cerulean-eyed teen thought to himself before a frown crossed his face at the reminder of his former friend as he shook his head to rid himself of the memory. The girl noticed how his expression changed suddenly and sent a confused look his way. Noting the look that the girl was giving him, Naruto did his best to wave her concern off with his one arm laden with groceries. Just then, the girl noticed something strange and for the first time seemed to realize the fact that Naruto was missing a limb, if the way her eyes suddenly trained on the missing appendage was anything to go by. At the very least, though, she had the sense not to ask about it. Naruto also saw how the girl's attention was suddenly focused on his missing arm. It was kind of surprising and kind of refreshing that it took her so long to notice. Usually, it was the first thing that people noticed when meeting him for the first time. Of course, after nearly drowning in a river and being more concerned with finding wherever it was she was meant to go, it did make some sense. Before he could think more on it, a growling noise drew Naruto's attention, and it wasn't hard to determine where it was coming from. Gee, how the girl's face suddenly turned scarlet from embarrassment and her hands flew to her stomach. Hungry? Naruto asked unnecessarily, getting a nod in response. Guess we should get you something to eat then. The blonde murmured, mostly to himself. No, money. The girl supplied. Letting out a small sigh, Naruto dismissed her concern as he turned to search for somewhere they could get some food. Don't worry about it, he told her. Ohagi, a common Japanese sweet, and, as Naruto stared at his empty wallet with a twitching eyebrow, it was currently being eaten by the girl only a couple feet away. A small mountain of them. Naruto honestly wasn't sure what annoyed him more, the fact that this girl, who still hadn't even bothered to introduce herself, not that he had either, had spent all his money, or that she did it without batting an eye and was now wearing such a happy expression on her face as she ate. At least she is enjoying herself. Naruto grumbled to himself. While irritated, Naruto couldn't really bring himself to hold it against the girl, having gone hungry on more than one occasion. She could offer me some, he reasoned. So do you mind telling me your name now? Naruto dead to ask her, if for no other reason than not to have to call her the girl in his mind anymore. My name is Benio A, she told him, and instantly went back to eating her ohagi. Benio A, Naruto murmured, testing the name out for himself, before he proceeded to introduce himself. Well, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. It's nice to meet you, Benio, I guess. Benio hummed in response, though Naruto wondered if she heard him or not. Gods knows that he became nearly totally oblivious to the world around him when he was eating ramen. Seeing the number that Benio still had to work through, and feeling a little peckish himself and without a cent left to his name because of a certain someone, Naruto briefly considered taking one for himself. It did seem fair, he paid for them after all, but if they were her favorite food like Naruto suspected, then it was likely that Benio would bite his arm off for trying. And he did only have the one left. Best to leave things well enough alone. After Benio finished with her impromptu meal, the pair were once more walking through Ukiyo town, trying to figure out where to go from here. So do you have anyone you can call to ask for directions? Naruto asked. No phone. Benio answered. Naruto nodded his head in response. From what he was told at one time, a cell phone falling into the river would have been the end of it, but they've gotten so fancy nowadays that it would have probably been fine. Probably. He'd never been bothered to test it for himself. You can use mine, the former shinobi offered. Do you know the number? Benio just gave Naruto a blank stare. Right. Naruto nodding, responding to Benio's unspoken statement. No one remembers phone numbers anymore. It was weird for Naruto, at first, to find that no one really bothered to remember the phone numbers of anyone they knew. Of course, after a couple of years of having the convenience of modern technology at his disposal, Naruto understood. Well, if we can't figure anything else out, I know somewhere you can stay for the night. The blonde offered, thinking of the Seika dorm and break glass in case of emergencies, on the off chance that fell through for whatever reason she could stay at the newer compound. He didn't want to even begin to imagine how his mother would react to him bringing a girl home. Though the alternative of leaving Benio to sleep out on the street would probably cause Kushina to react violently. Benio absently nodded her head, but most of her attention was on a pair of children riding by on bikes. An older brother and a younger sister, it would seem. Kohana. The older brother called back to his younger sibling. Naruto's ear twitched at the name for a second, thinking he heard something else as he came to a stop. You need to keep up. Hurry up. Wait up, big brother. The little girl pleaded, pedaling as fast as she could. Benio couldn't help but find herself smiling at the pair as she remembered a time long since past. She had no Ner turned her back to the pair before the sound of twisted cackling reached the pair's ears, causing them to freeze, only to quickly come out of it when something clattered to the ground. Quickly spinning around, the two teens saw the bikes lying on the ground without either child anywhere in sight. While Naruto's eyes swiftly darted around for any sign of the two kids, Benio reached to her thigh hole, and grabbed one of the talismans and brought it before her. I humbly and respectfully beg your forgiveness. Please grant my humble request to enter through the gates of the gods. Open the gates of Nagano. Kyukyunyoritsuryo, finishing her chant, Benio threw the talisman in front of her. Naruto, having turned his attention to the dark-haired girl when she started speaking, watched the talisman sail through the air as it turned into a torii of light within a circle. Before the blonde Uzumaki could question Benio on what was going on, the gate suddenly rushed toward them, forcing them both through, and for a second Naruto found himself blinded by the light of the gate. When Naruto could see again, the world around him had changed completely. Describing things as hell on earth or a barren wasteland wouldn't be all that far off. There was not a single building as far as Naruto could see that wasn't in complete ruin. The land was dyed an ominous red without any signs of the slightest vegetation, and chunks of rocks were impossibly floating in the air, defying the laws of gravity. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, or possibly smoke, and what sky could be seen through the clouds was a pale yellow. All that was really missing was the fire and brimstone. There were demons, monsters, though. No two looked alike, but all possessed the darkest of green skin. The only other thing that they shared was the Kuji-kiri, a crisscrossing pattern that glowed in a faint light that made them only look even more sinister. Some of them had other markings that glowed in the same light. Impurities, better known as kegare, were the creatures that resided in Nagano, the twisted earth that Naruto currently found himself in. Enemy to exorcists, these creatures were mostly driven by the instinct to devour spiritual energy, spell power, in order to grow stronger. And currently one of these abominations was encroaching on the two children, the older brother lying on the ground bleeding as he was held by his little sister. Big brother, you have to get up. The little girl pleaded in tears. Let's go home. Kohana, run. The elder sibling pleaded, his voice barely coming up above a whisper as his eyes started to dull. No. Kohana refuted with a shake of her head, her form now trembling. We were supposed to stay together. Whatever reservations, doubts, Naruto had, he couldn't let them be the reason why he stood by and did nothing. He had to do everything he could to save them. He couldn't bear letting someone die in front of him. Not again. Yet in the second it took him to take a single step, two blades slammed into the kegare looming over the siblings. Naruto blinked in surprise and suddenly found Benio there, a foot planted firmly against the creature's head, grabbing the sword before swinging herself over the kegare, dragging the swords with her and decapitating the monster before it burst apart and a Saiman appearing where it stood. It couldn't have taken Benio more than 10 seconds. It was only as she landed that Naruto could see that Benio was wearing a mask very much like the ones that belonged to the Anbu of Konoha, only hers lacked eye holes and the painted features. Unfortunately, just as it seemed like the danger had passed, Megano proved just how merciless a place it was because, like zombies rising from the dead, hands tore through the ground and Kagare W. wrenched themselves from the earth surrounding Benio and the two kids. Even surrounded as she was, Benio didn't seem to panic or be afraid. Instead, Benio planted her swords into the ground as she drew or talismans from her thigh holster before throwing them in front of herself and having them float in the air. Might Talisman, Skanda Talisman, Vajra Talisman, Star Sight Talisman, Exorcist enchantments. With each call the talismans activated as Benio fed them her spiritual power, the calligraphy on them shining brightly until they were all that remained floating in the air. Pulverizing Lion Strike, Heaven Striding Speed. Adamantine Raiment, Calamity Foresight. The first talisman attached itself to Benio's arms, the second to her legs, and the third spread across her torso, the outlined markings of each talisman shining brightly. The fourth applied itself to the mask that Benio wore, the features that had been missing before becoming readily present as blue ink appeared. It outlined the eyes, making them stand out now, before moving back, zigzagging along the mask until reaching the base of the ears. Unlike Naruto's own whisker marks, which were 3 straight lines, on each cheek of T. He mask was a brush-like stroke that curved to form 2 whisker-like marks. Finally, on the center of the forehead a diamond was painted, not unlike the one on Tsunade's, within a rounded 4-pointed star that was missing its top part. Then all Naruto saw was a flash of light that zoomed across the battlefield. Benio moved almost faster than Naruto could follow, her swords cutting through the Kagare, not even slowing down as she tore through their flesh. Unlike shinobi, Naruto had learned, exorcists could not augment their bodies with spiritual power like shinobi would with chakra. That is to say that they could to a degree, making them marginally stronger than the average civilian, but only to a certain extent. Their solution: exorcist enchantments. Talismans that could put them on even footing with the monstrous Kagare and the shinobi of the elemental nations. The only limitations were the exorcist's reserve of spirit energy and their control over it. In a matter of a couple of seconds, the swarm of impurities that had surrounded the 3 humans were wiped out, Benio appearing pretty much where she started. That was incredible, Naruto said, approaching Benio as she took off her mask. Apparently, the girl was completely unaware of his presence as she started at the sound of Naruto's voice before turning to face him, an utterly shocked look on her face. What are you doing here? Benio asked, dumbfounded. Naruto blinked a couple of times in surprise himself. He was literally only standing couple feet away from her when she brought them here. Seriously, how did you miss dragging me here with you? The blonde demanded, causing Benio to turn her head away from him. Naruto felt his annoyance flaring, but before he could get into it with exorcist girl, the pair wrote a whimper-filled sniffle that drew their attention. The two saw the little girl with tear-filled eyes staring up at them, still kneeling by her prone brother's form. Please help, the girl pleaded. My big brother please. A deep frown spread across Naruto's face. As much as he might want to, there was nothing that he could do to help. Healing had never been his forte. Luckily, it seemed that Benio had it well in hand. Walking toward the 2 children, Benio grabbed another talisman. Don't worry, he's going to be fine, she told Konoha, doing her best to reassure the younger girl. Naruto watched silently as the talisman shined before the wound on the boy's back vanished, even the blood that was on his clothing. Besides that, Naruto couldn't miss how the boy's expression notably eased as the pain ebbed away. He's better, Naruto said, a statement rather than a question. With Konoha looking up at her unquestioningly, Benio nodded her head in response anyway, once more drawing tears from the girl. But relief rather than sorrow. Benio turned her gaze to the blonde and studied him closely. He was acting normally. He wasn't confused, in awe, or scared by what was going on. He pretty much came right out and said that he had been impressed by her skills, but even then, he wasn't behaving like someone who, well, he made it seem like what she did was almost to be expected. So, this is Megano? The blonde questioned, as he took another quick look around, but didn't necessarily direct it at Benio. That went a long way in confirming Benio's suspicions. She had briefly mentioned this. place his name when she was opening the gate, but she didn't think that blue-eyed boy had caught it or would make the connection. Then again, Benio had only met Naruto today. For all she knew, the teen could be highly observant and intuitive. Are you? Benio was cut off from finishing her question as the ground underneath their feet started to shake and break apart. While a little surprised when Naruto reacted instantly by picking up the still unconscious boy, Benio didn't let that deter her in the slightest as she grabbed the youngest of the sibling pair. Throwing Kohana over her shoulder, a hand firmly against the little girl's back while still clasping her sword, and her remaining sword held with her teeth by the hilt. With her remaining free hand, she grabbed a hold of Naruto. It was only hence she kicked off the ground that her focus faltered. They were moving far faster than what she expected, and the force that carried them was slightly uneven. It only took looking toward her side for her to realize a possible cause. Naruto Uzumaki. He must have done something. Under normal circumstances, the blonde should have been dragged behind her, even if only slightly, but instead he was right beside her. She hadn't seen Naruto activate any enchantments that would explain this absurd strength, but either way, whatever he'd done was at least getting them away from the Kagero faster. Not a second later, Benio was thankful for whatever Naruto had done as she felt the wind blow through her hair and the sound of something crashing into the ground behind them. Only once they were a safe distance away, standing on top a hill, did they turn to see that the Kagero had lashed out with one of its long limbs, and though it had missed, that wasn't enough to make it stop cackling. It took a second before the Kagero spotted them and began to drag itself toward them. That thing looks like it's as big as Gamabunta, Naruto muttered, staring down at the behemoth. Here, Benio said, holding out a talisman to Naruto. Taking it, Naruto just stared at it for a second. It had been a while since he had last held one, so he didn't recognize it right away. What's this? He asked out loud absently. A talisman to take you out of Magano. Benio answered, eyes locked on the Kagero far below them. Take those two with you, and leave this place. It didn't take Naruto even a second nor need to guess what Benio was planning to do. He saw it in her body, the resolve, and the way that she tightened her grip on her swords. You're going to fight that thing? Although it was meant to be a statement, Naruto couldn't keep the incredulousness out of his voice. Can you beat it? A pause. Who knows? Benio disclosed honestly. She had never faced off with a Kagero of that size before, so she wasn't sure what her chances were. Still, she was determined to face the monster and didn't possess a shred of fear or doubt within her. Who knows? Naruto repeated, a hint of disbelief still in his voice. But you're still going to fight it? This time it was a clear statement. Benio nodded her head as she moved to the edge of the crag. I am an exorcist. My family has been exorcists for generations, each one exceptional. I won't dishonor their legacy by running away. The young woman claimed, her voice resolute. Stopping at the cliff's edge, Benio turned her head to stare at Naruto from over her shoulder. And, this is for me too. Have you heard of the Hinatsuki tragedy? With that one question, Naruto's world didn't come to a halt, it completely faded away. The pleading and sobs giving way to the sounds of crashes and a raging fire. I messed up. I just wanted to be. No, I don't want. Pete, please, save me. Ruto. Enough. Kyuubi's voice snapped Naruto out of his recollections. For whatever reason that the fox had for doing such a thing, bringing him back to the present. If Naruto had expressed anything in the brief moment that he had been lost in his memories, Benio didn't give any indication of it. She was sure to have commented on it given her question. Instead, she continued without any delay. The primary target for Kagero are innocent, untainted children. Exorcists are no exception. So, to ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated, I'll create a future where people won't ever experience sadness at the hands of the Kagero. To cleanse all the Kagero, that is my dream. Benio proclaimed, making it sound like her dream was an inevitability. Once more, Benio's words stirred memories within Naruto that he had done his best to forget. My dream is to be the greatest Hokage ever. Believe it. I'll cleanse them, the Kagero, all of them. His dream is a shinobi and an exorcist. If there was one thing that Naruto knew about himself, it was that his dream and promises are what drove him. But what good did it do to have a dream if everyone went out of their way to deny him the chance of achieving it? What good was making a promise if it turned out that he was always too weak to fulfill it? Since the night of the Hinatsuki tragedy, Naruto had felt lost, untethered, a lot like when Konoha had exiled him, only managing to keep from falling into the same depression as before because of those at the Seika dorm, the Nuru clan, his grandfather, and his mother. Yet right now, with her conviction and determination, Benio was reminding him of the person that he used to be before. "Take care of those two for me," Benio said, charging Naruto with the kid's safety, as she jumped back into the fray and put her fox mask back on. For a moment Naruto felt him's LF move to follow her before he managed to stop himself. Landing in front of the giant Kagero, Benio took a stance, her two swords crossed before her as she leaned forward, one leg in front bent at the Nay, and her other leg stretched out behind her, heel raised so that only her toes were firmly planted in the ground. Then Naruto blinked, heard what sounded like a cannon going off, and afterward watched as Benio slid back a bit across the ground. Turning his gaze toward the Kagero, the blonde saw that a spot on the monster's chest was cracked like it had been shot. It wasn't hard for Naruto to figure out what happened. Just how fast is she? Naruto wondered to himself. Benio carefully assessed the damage that she caused. It's tougher than I thought, and it looks like such a flabby blob too. He mused to herself as she fell back into her stance. It's a test of endurance, we'll see who gives up first, she thought before taking a single steadying breath. Ephemeral lotus dance. Most after having missed Benio's previous attack would have paid careful attention, now hoping to see what the young female exorcist was doing. Naruto didn't bother, not after the first second anyway. The Kagero was pelted with a continuous and seemingly endless attack as Benio couldn't even be seen. The only reason that Naruto could even be sure that Benio was still there were the dust that was kicked up where she landed and kicked off the ground, and the points of impact that appeared across the impurity's body. Seriously, just how fast is she? Naruto found himself marveling once more. Before, the closest person that he knew that was their age, and was anywhere near as fast as Benio was Rock Lee, and even the green-clad genin, without his ridiculous weights, didn't disappear completely from sight. Naruto knew that enchantments were supposed to do exactly what their name implied, and enhance an exorcist's physical abilities well beyond what an average person was capable of. But this was more than the blonde thought possible, and just like that it dawned on the former shinobi that what he was witnessing was the proof of Benio's talent as an exorcist. Naruto was even more awestruck when he remembered that the emerald-eyed girl currently had 5 exorcist enchantments activated, more than what most other exorcists were able to use at once. Whether it was the latent talent passed down in her family or Benio's own determination and effort she put into her training, Naruto was left without a doubt that she was exceptional. The minutes trickled by as Naruto silently watched on while Benio succeed in lopping off a limb or two when she managed to strike at a joint. And yet, is she slowing down? Naruto questioned. As much as he didn't want to believe it, Naruto was finding it easier to keep track of Benio as she continued her onslaught. Naruto's trepidation was given weight when the Kagero managed to react to Benio's attack by throwing a punch that connected, and sacrificing its arm in the process. While Benio managed to land on her feet after the punch, it was more accurate to call it a crash as she fell to her knees right afterwards, with her mask shattering and falling to the ground in front of her. Naruto found himself almost rushing to Benio's side again, only this time he was stopped by the sound of Konoha's crying. "Please, no more," the little girl begged in a sob even as she clung to her brother's form. I want to go home. Daddy, Mommy." Naruto gazed at the girl sadly. If the blonde Uzumaki could have it his way, then the young girl and her brother wouldn't have to go through this. But that wasn't something he could control. "Hey, it's going to be alright," he promised, patting Konoha's head gently to reassure her, holding up the talisman that Benio had given him between his fingers. "No need to cry, you'll be home before you know it." Instead, he would offer her something he would always wish for when he was her age. To have someone comfort him when he felt lonely and scared. Benio struggled to catch her breath, feeling a trickle of blood falling down the side of the head, as her enchantments all faded away. Is this the end? Benio wondered to herself as she glared up at the Kagero. As much as she fought to get back on her feet, Benio couldn't gather the strength, and the way the Kagero seemed to be taking its time while it watched her struggle only incensed her. She wanted to fight to purify this Kagero, for her life, for her dream. 4. Benio's eyes widened in shock as Naruto suddenly landed in front of her. Huh, what are you doing here? The female exorcist questioned. Don't worry, I used the talisman to get Kohana and her brother out of here, Naruto assured the girl, turning to face the Kagero. 3. Benio's thoughts briefly Florida shed to the two siblings, and while she felt a sense of relief, her concern immediately returned to the present. That's not, Benio began, frustration evident in her voice. Why didn't you leave with them? Why didn't you run away? She demanded. Naruto stared at Benio from over his shoulder. Benio found herself starting as she looked into Naruto's eyes. How could she best describe them? Steely, determined, unwavering. All those words fit, and yet at the same time they seemed to fall short in perfectly expressing the look in Naruto's eyes. Standing before her like he was Naruto seemed so indomitable and unshakable to Benio that she found herself nearly enthralled by his mere presence. Naruto's eyes scrutinized Benio's form carefully, taking note of every injury that she now sported. When she is facing off against the Kagero, Naruto had been awed by the strength and speed she possessed, but to see her now left Naruto feeling irritated and just a little disappointed. What happened to that big talk about exercising all the Kagero? Was this all your dream amounted to? Naruto demanded of the girl. If you're going to make such a promise, you better be strong enough to back it up, he told all the while he knew just hypocritical his words were. I've really become so pathetic, Naruto thought in frustration as he turned to face the Kagero once more and moving toward the giant impurity. But I guess I can make up for it right now, even if just a little bit. Wait, where are you going? Benio questioned with dawning realization. You can't mean to fight that thing. Not when you're. She didn't finish her statement, but from the way that she glanced at Naruto's missing arm it was easy enough to guess. Naruto couldn't blame Benio for doubting him, not when they had just met, and having a missing arm. Any sane person would question if he could fight a Kagero, let alone one that size. Especially in a profession where such a crippling injury would normally result in retirement. Still, there is something that you should know about me, Benio, Naruto said once more, turning to face the giant Kagero. Don't ever underestimate me, he declared, walking toward the Kagero. Now despite the confident air that Naruto was putting, he had to acknowledge that things weren't going to be as easy or simple as he was making them to be. He wasn't carrying any weapons on him, and he definitely didn't have any talismans. And it was clear that Benio was out, so he couldn't even ask her for any, so he was left with one choice. And he really didn't like it. Oi, Fox, Naruto called to his imprisoned tenant. Came the Biju's disinterested grunt. Lend me some of your chakra, the blonde demanded. If he actually cared, the Kyuubi's fur would have bristled slightly at having a human demand anything of him. But since that incident a year ago, things had been so very boring for the fox. So, he'd allow it this one time if it meant relieving his boredom, even if only for a little while. Oh, have you finally had enough of being a coward and running away? The Kyuubi questioned. Though he had decided to help the blue-eyed Uzumaki, that didn't mean that Kyuubi was going to make it easy for the brat. Naruto's brow twitched at the accusation. I wasn't running away, Naruto refuted angrily. Kyuubi scoffed at the Uzumaki's denial. Whatever, Kyuubi muttered dismissively, as he let his chakra flow into its container. Because in the end, whether the boy accepted his own cowardice or not didn't matter to him. Benio's eyes widened as she watched a strange energy bubble up around Naruto. At first it appeared to look like water that had been dyed red and had started to boil over. For a second Benio thought it was taking the shape of some animal. She could make out a pair of long ears and tail. Before it all converged around his missing arm. With the sleeve of his uniform billowing within the strange energy, she watched it take the shape of Naruto's absent limb. What was more remarkable to the girl was how the Kagero was suddenly so anxious at the sight of it. Is the Kagero afraid of his arm? Naruto's breath nearly hitched as he felt the entrancing chakra of the Kyuubi surging through his body. After nearly 2.5 years, it was nearly overwhelming for the former Konoha shinobi to suddenly experience the Biju's chakra once more. But after a second and releasing a single deep breath, he brought the power to heal, forming an arm with it. Flexing the fingers of his new hand, Naruto turned a glare to the giant Kagero. With Naruto staring it down, the Kagero reacted on a terror-induced instinct and lashed out on the blonde, trying to crush him beneath one of its limbs. There was nothing that Benio could do but widen her eyes at the incoming attack, but only because before she knew it, She felt a pair of arms pick her up off the ground and then suddenly found herself several feet away from the kegare. Now while she hadn't been moved faster than what she was used to, it had been unexpected, so she was a little out of sorts. A sudden shift though snapped Benio back to her senses, reminding her that she was in somebody's arms. Turning her attention away from the kegare, she found herself looking up at Naruto, and a dark red blush spread across her face as the realization struck that she was being held in Naruto's arms against his chest. All of Naruto's focus was on the kegare as he set Benio down and proceeded to bring his hands together in an all too familiar hand seal, but also one he hadn't used in so long. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Naruto called, summoning 4 clones into existence in plumes of smoke. As soon as his clones were created, Naruto and his copies took off, spreading out from one another. Those aren't enchantments, Benio thought to herself, watching the 5 blondes engage the kegare. A jutsu. Then does that mean that he is a shinobi from the hidden nation? She wondered. While she had never met a shinobi before, Benio had heard of them and the things that they could supposedly do. Though Benio figured that there was nothing supposed about it now, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little disappointed with the kegare. It was large and undoubtedly strong, but it still proved to be little more than a mindless beast. The only reason, Naruto figured, that Benio couldn't exorcise the impurity was because it seemed to be such a large tub of lard. And she didn't have an attack that could cut through it. If it wasn't for his missing arm, it definitely wouldn't have deserved him using Kyuubi's chakra against it. Naruto could practically feel Kyuubi being smug within the seal at that thought. With a mental command, 2 of Naruto's clones charged at the kegare, weaving between the limbs it used to attack them and destroying them in turn using their Kyuubi chakra created arm. While those 2 were rendering the kegare immobile, Naruto had the 3rd clone toss him high into the air, followed by the last of his doubles. Besieged as it was being, kegare was still aware of the real Naruto and his approaching clone as it tried to back away, only to fail with most its legs destroyed so it could only slightly hobble about. In tandem, Naruto and his clone reached out with their chakra arm, letting it extend and latch onto the kegare before pulling back to draw them in the rest of the way. With its legs all but gone, and the damage that Benio had caused it before being jerked forward caused it inevitably to start rolling forward, which resulted in Naruto and his clone to be above the kegare's head. Having a wide open shot to the back of its head, Naruto held his chakra arm to his clone so it could help him perform his other signature jutsu. Naruto stared at the forming jutsu out of the corner of his eyes, watching as the vermilion chakra swirled to life. This jutsu, this legacy left to him by his father, Naruto decided, even if he were to never use it in battle again after today, or it was infinitely harder to master using his left hand, he would master it. It was the least he could do to honor the father he never knew. Eyes snapping back to the kegare, Naruto let his clone throw him at the impurity once the jutsu was stable. Rasengan. Benio wasn't exactly sure what she just witnessed. She had seen Naruto and his double create something in the palm of the blonde's hand, not that she could make out what it was at this distance. Before he aimed for the back of the kegare's head. Then its head just exploded, disintegrated, its remains twisting and turning in the wind, only for the rest of its body to then burst apart and a giant Saiman to appear in its place. All that Benio could do was stare in shock as Naruto landed safely on the ground, his clones bursting in clouds of smoke, and make his way over to her as that arm disappeared. When he stood in front of her, Benio managed to pick herself up in a sort of daze. That jutsu, that arm, what was that? Just how powerful are you? Benio questioned him. Powerful. Me. Naruto mumbled, clutching at the sleeve of his uniform with his one arm. That must be some kind of joke. I'm so far from strong, he said softly under his breath that was impossible for Benio to make out. But from the desolate expression on Naruto's face said it all. How about we get out of here? The former Konoha shinobi suggested. After such an arduous experience, Naruto hoped that the rest of his night would at least be relaxing as he dropped Benio off at the Seika dorm, never having determined her initial destination. Being an exorcist, it shouldn't have been a problem for Benio to saint either, especially if it was for a single night. Only, as it turns out, that the place that Benio had been searching for was the Seika dorm. With Benio never telling him the name of the place she was looking for and him not telling her the name of the dorm, they didn't learn about this fact until after they arrived. And having spent several hours searching for it at the beginning too. Now Benio A's being dotted on by the residents of the Seika dorm, except for Ryogo, who was standing beside Naruto watching it take place while throwing him sly grins, like a literal princess. Apparently, the reason that Ryogo wanted Naruto to come was so that he could meet Benio. There was also a short old woman that was reprimanding Atsushi to keep him from getting too close to Benio and not have him stare at her with his lecherous gaze. From what Naruto understood, since the woman never bothered to introduce herself, she was Benio's personal attendant. You could have mentioned that you were looking for the Seika dorm. Naruto grumbled the hours that they spent searching a complete waste. Benio paused in her eating, ohagi of course, to stare at Naruto with a light glare. You could have said, you were an exorcist. Benio retorted back softly. You could have said you were an exorcist. Naruto shot back. He didn't deny it. Ryogo thought to himself with a grin spreading across his face. This is the map, right? Shinosuke asked Benio, having laid it on the table. With it being a few hours since falling into the river, the map had naturally dried off by now, but Shinosuke could still feel how brittle the paper had become after Benio had fallen into the river with it as he carefully opened it in case it tore. Now while it was dry it was, yeah, this is completely illegible. The purple haired boy decided after a moment as he tried to make out of any of it, Atsushi looking over his shoulder, his head tilted in confusion as well. Isn't this great, Naruto? Ryogo said teasingly. Benio A's the same age as you, which means you have a little rival now, tilde. Naruto let out an annoyed grunt as he tried not to react to Ryogo's provocation. The older teen knew him and his competitive nature well. So, it wasn't hard to figure out that Ryogo was trying to goad him. With a roll of his eyes, Naruto shoved the groceries that Ryogo had asked him for the other day into his hand before he spun on his heel. Standing at the door of the dorm, Naruto spared a glance back over his shoulder only to find Benio still glaring back at him. For a moment they just stared at one another silently before Naruto left, closing the door behind him. Walking through the gates of the Nura clan compound, Naruto let out a tired sigh as today seemed to have gone on forever. The last thing that he expected when he got up that morning was to step back into his shoes as an exorcist. But whether because Benio reminded him of how he used to be or he became frustrated at seeing her brought down and reminded of his own weakness, Naruto couldn't help but intervene. Though it was only a one-time thing. This absolutely did not mean that he was going to start being an exorcist again. You hear that, Ryogo? A one-time thing. You're home rather late, Master Naruto. A voice greeted Naruto from his home's entrance. Naruto was a little surprised to find Zen standing there. Zen, Naruto said. I didn't think you'd still be here. A grimace crossed Zen's face as he rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, sorry, I'm not feeling that well. Zen admitted sadly. So, I'll be staying here till I recuperate. Sorry for being a burden. The yokai apologized. Naruto shook his head. I told you that your health was what mattered most. If you're not feeling well, then you can stay here and rest as long as you want. Naruto assured his friend as he drew closer, removing his shoes at the Genkan. Thank you, Master Naruto, that is most kind of you. Zen said gratefully. Naruto disagreed. You are part of the Nura clan family, it why makes sense to help you if you need it. The blonde Uzumaki countered. Zen smiled gratefully at the younger boy before continuing their conversation. Anyway, Master Naruto, where have you been? You couldn't still have been at school at this hour. Both Yuki Onna and Aotobo returned quite a while ago and the sun has already set. Zen pointed out. Were you worried? Naruto asked with an amused voice. I know I might be like this. He continued, gesturing to his missing arm with the other. But I can still handle myself against anyone here. The blonde pointed out, and he was right. Even with only one arm, he was leagues above anyone who would try to accost him, be they some petty thug or even by Japan's infamous Yakuza. Compared to the bandits of the elemental nations, the only reason the Aminals on this side of the veil were stronger would be because of the weapons that they had available to them. Besides, I'm the Nura clan's third heir, the next supreme commander of all yokai, right? I think that walk at night is kind of in the job description. Naruto claimed jokingly. A joke that seemed to go right over Zen's head as his face lit up at Naruto's statement. Right, Zen agreed readily. I'm glad to see that you're finally coming to accept your role as the Nura clan's next leader. He said, but then his brow furrowed as he rubbed the back of his neck and looked over his shoulder. Although I wouldn't say that I am the one that has been worried. Naruto looked confused for a second before he picked up the sound of running footsteps quickly approaching them. Master Naruto. Yuki Ona's voice screamed out before the young woman appeared and nearly launched herself at Naruto, the Uzumaki taking a step back at the impact. Yuki cough Ona, Naruto wheezed out through the forced expulsion of air. Regaining his proper footing, Naruto looked down only to find Yuki Ona staring back up at him, the tears that she shed instantly freezing over. Master Naruto, I was so worried. Yuki Ona cried inconsolably. I am so sorry. I am a failure as an attendant. After school I came home on my own and you disappeared for hours. What if something happened to you? Yuki Ona blathered out, her tears unrelenting. Naruto rubbed the back of his head uncomfortably. This situation was something that he wasn't used to. In Konoha there wasn't anyone who'd have noticed if he was missing, be it a couple of minutes or half a day, so he never had to hold himself accountable for his whereabouts. With the exorcist and the others of the Sakai dorm, there was hardly a moment that he was alone or unsupervised. Being restricted to school, the dorms, or out on a mission with other capable adults back when he had been active exorcist. Not to mention the whole having a girl cry for hi. Was something that he was not all that used to either. In fact, this had only happened 2 other times in his memory. Once by Miura after the Hinatsuki tragedy, although at the time he had been too busy shedding his own tears to think about it, and the other time was when he and his mom had been reunited. Mom. The thought had no sooner crossed his mind than Naruto felt himself being pulled into someone's embrace. Honestly, the identity of the person who was hugging him wasn't at all a mystery. In fact, the biggest surprise was that Naruto hadn't noticed his mother's approach until she was pulling him into her embrace. Even being inactive for over a decade, it was clear that Kushina kept up her training from her time as a kunoichi. You had me so worried. Kushina reprimanded her son lightly. I can take care of myself. Naruto muttered against her shoulder. You don't need to worry about me. Kushina pulled back slightly so she could stare her son in the eyes, while still maintaining a firm hold on him. I know, the red-haired mother acknowledged, but that doesn't stop me from worrying anyway. She told him gently with a warm smile. Naruto broke eye contact, unable to continue staring at his mother. Not with the look that she was giving him. Not that he found himself disliking it, the opposite in fact. Except for this strange squirming sensation that he was getting from around his stomach. And it was getting worse. Lady Kushina, Master Naruto. Zen's voice came hesitantly from beside them. You're kind of suffocating Yuki Onna right now, he said a tad awkwardly. For some reason he got the distinct impression that his existence had been completely forgotten about. It was only until after Zen pointed it out that Naruto noticed a shaking fist out of the corner of his eye. And it was growing weaker. Simultaneously the mother and son duo broke apart to reveal a blue-faced Yuki Onna with swirls in her eyes. I couldn't breath. I thought I was going to die. Is this my punishment? The female yokai mumbled out as she tilted dangerously to the side only for Naruto to catch her with his arm. The 2 Uzumakis stared at the passed-out girl before glancing at each other and breaking out into a light laughter at the situation that they had unintentionally caused. Come on, Kushina instructed her son. Dinner is already ready and most everyone has already started. You can lay Yuki Onna down and eat. She finished, turning around to head further into the house. Right, Naruto murmured, picking Yuki Onna up into a loose princess carry. If she had been conscious for it, Yuki Onna would have probably passed out as a result anyway. Staring at his mother's retreating form, Naruto was reminded of his earlier promise. Mom. Naruto called out to the red-haired woman rather unsurely. It still felt weird to call her that. At least that was how Naruto felt after going all his life never having referred to someone like that. Kushina froze once she heard Naruto call her that. Brought nearly to tears. Having held out hope for so long to hear Naruto call her mom, it always affected her greatly whenever he did, as scarce as those times might be. Still suppressing her tears, so as not to concern Naruto and possibly make things more awkward than they already were, Kushina turned to face her son with a gentle smile. Yes, she asked. Seeing Naruto holden, Ji onto Yuki Onna as he was nearly caused the mother to squeal. Her son looked so dashing and heroic. I want to master the Rasengan. Naruto said straightforwardly before he grew bashful. And I was wondering if you could help me. He finished looking off to the side with an embarrassed blush. If she didn't have such good control of herself, Kushina was sure that she would be jumping in joy at having Naruto ask her for help. Still, it was a rather close thing. Of course, the red-haired Uzumaki agreed right away. I don't know the Rasengan myself, she admitted, but I was with your father while he was developing it and teaching it to Jiraiya and Kakashi. Kushina told him. The smile that Naruto started to wear at having his mother agree to help him so readily was instead replaced by a look of confusion at her last statement. Kakashi-sen, Kakashi knows the Rasengan. The other Uzumaki asked in surprise. Now it was Kushina's turn to be confused by Naruto's statement. Yeah, he was your father's student. Did you not know? She asked him in turn only to receive a shake of the head in response. I see. Did you at least know that Jiraiya was your godfather? Kushina inquired with a sinking feeling. My what? Well, that answered that question. Closing her eyes, Kushina did her best not to lose her temper at that moment, but with the way that her hair was managing to sway in the non-existent wind, it was obvious that she was only just barely succeeding in suppressing her anger. Kushina was well aware how Konoha had betrayed her son, and that's not even getting into how he grew up. But it was now apparent to Kushina that they had abandoned her son long before then. Kushina didn't know how or when, but she swore retribution in her son's name. She was positive that all the Nura clan would gladly offer to help as well. They were a clan of evil yokai after all. It took Kushina a couple of deep breaths before she was able to regain her composure. Anyway, we can get started right away if you want, Kushina offered. After you've had dinner, she amended before she cupped her chin thoughtfully. Though your father wasn't ever able to complete it, the red-haired Uzumaki added as afterthought. Complete it? Naruto repeated, his eyes shining in wonder. The Rasengan was already a powerful jutsu. To think that such a technique wasn't finished yet boggled the mind. Kushina nodded her head, as she smiled brilliantly and with an excited gleam in her own eyes, as she told her son what Minato hoped to accomplish with the Rasengan. Deeper in the compound just around the core, Ner with his back against the wall, Nurarihyun listened in on the two's conversation with a pleased grin. Things finally seemed to be improving between mother and child. This was only a first step and it would be a while yet before things got to where they should have been, but he was sure that they would get there eventually. Nurarihyun was also sure that Minato would have been happy to know that he provided the start for Naruto and Kushina's reconciliation. That's it for today, I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.